welcome back to I Say Our Wrong Reads, and today we're going to be recommending 7 books set in Scotland by Scottish authors. So, a lot of people like reading Scottish literature, and it is one of the most popular tropes in romance fiction. And there's also a kind of a whole subsection of crime novels dedicated to Scottish crime. Um, but rarely do you actually find that it's Scottish writers writing their own perspective. And that's why I wanted to recommend some nice books or some silly books that were written by Scottish authors about Scotland or set in Scotland. And I figured that was quite an important thing and it was quite important to me, which is why I have compiled this list. There will be a few honourable mentions at the end of ones that I haven't personally read, but I know are widely loved and enjoyed. So I'll stick them in just for the end. So, first up, let's do some non fiction um, books. And what we'll start with is Where Are the Women by Sarah Sheridan. So essentially, this book is a reimagined Scotland. So throughout Scotland, a lot of our famous streets are landmarks, and all of these sort of things are named after men. And quite a lot of those men were men who perpetrated colonialism and took part in the British Empire and the slave trade and all that sort of thing. So essentially, what Sarah Sheridan does is she takes all those men and replaces them all with women. And this book is very, very intersectional and full of feminism from people of colour, LGBT, all that sort of thing. It's very, very sectional, and it only doesn't only focus on one area of Scotland. It highlights the problems and colonial practices in a lot of port cities in Scotland, including Glasgow. A lot of Glasgow is just named after slave traders, and that's why kind of taking that and reevaluating it through a woman's lens of history is very, very fascinating. So, for example, one of the best examples is you have Arthur's Seat on in Edinburgh, which is the kind of hill that towers over Edinburgh. So, what if it was named after St Trudena instead of Arthur? Or what if Staffa wasn't named after Fingal? It wasn't Fingal's cave anymore, but it was Malvina's cave, and that sort of thing. All the different women who led the way throughout history. And I think this one, why this book is so fascinating to me, is that even though I am very, very passionate about Scottish history and I love it, there were so many women in here that I'd never heard of before. And it was completely, completely unknown to me, which is why I think everybody should give this a read, especially because it's definitely coming from a different standpoint, and I've really heard a lot of famous women in history books. This is really going, okay, so we celebrate men that do this. What about the women, the minorities that did this also, but they don't get any recognition for it? Why is that? So what would our world be like if everything was just named after women instead? There's just so many landmarks out there, and it's fascinating. It's fascinating. So that is why I think this is a very good recommendation if you want to know a little bit more about Scottish history, but just not through the most normal lens. So I mentioned Fingal's Cave earlier being changed into a different one, and if you want to know more about mythology and folk legends of Scotland, then the next book that I'm going to have will help you. This is The Lore of Scotland, a guide to Scottish legends by Westwood and Kingshill. Now, this book is more of a, I don't know how to say it, like a academic text or a fully comprehensive going across every era of Scotland. It's very kind of bare bones, so but it does tacked onto a lot of little things that are not often mentioned in things. So if you're trying to get an idea for what the general mythology is like in Scotland, this is a very, very good starting point. Now, if for kind of reference, this is the way what it kind of sort of looks like. So it's that sort of academic text, and it all has the references in it. So if you want to go and read further references, then you've got all of these references to pull from. And I think that's a reason why I find this book so good, is that it's not just kind of giving you about legends in a very digestible way is that it leaves the door open for you to go and read some more if you're interested in a particular area. Um, so this is ghosts, witch trials, customs, Celtic heritage, beliefs, lochs, mountains, landscape, all the way from the borders to the Isles. So it's very, very comprehensive and good. And as you can see, Sir Terry Pratchett liked it. So who better to recommend than the man himself? And the last of our non-fiction is going to be a true crime book. And it's a true crime book about a murder case that took place in the mid 19th century and kind of rocked Victorian society. And that is The Strange Affair of Madeline Smith by Douglas McGowan. Now, this is the only book on the list that isn't written by a Scottish person, but they did come to Scotland and go to the Mitchell Library, which holds all the court records and information about this case and presents it in a really succinct and fun way to read. And that's why I particularly like this retelling of it. So it's the kind of traditional story-esque non-fiction book. So it tells the kind of timeline in a very linear fashion, and it's got some lovely pictures in there taken from the Mitchell Library of Madeline Smith and her beau, who she did or did not kill. I'm not going to spoil it for anything, but it's essentially how an immigrant from the Channel Islands was having an affair with this upper class socialite, Madeline Smith, and he dies, and her whole life is like essentially thrown into this trial, and it's fascinating, and it kind of reads really, really fast paced and almost like a thriller, but like without the forced suspense throughout it. It's I would highly recommend it if you like true crime and you're wanting something a little bit different, Victorian murder, then this is what you're looking for, and I would highly recommend it. And that's us finished with kind of non-fiction for the moment. And next we'll move on to some lovely fiction stories. And we'll start with an absolute classic, and that is Whiskey Galore by Compton Mackenzie. Now, if you know a little bit about Scottish history, you might know about the Whiskey Galore proliferation of a ship off the coast of in the book it's called Toddy, but this actually happened in the Hebrides. Was essentially during the war, this ship crash landed and it was slowly sinking and its cargo was going to be lost. So the islanders found out that it was full of whiskey. And as the war had been going on, they were getting less and less whiskey as it was going on. So they decided, okay, what we're going to do is we're all going to go out here and we're going to steal this whiskey and we're going to bring it back and we're going to hide it so the British soldiers can't find it. And so basically, what comes around is that kind of comedy, that purely Hebridean comedy that is Whiskey Galore. And it's been made into two different films. The first one was made in the late 40s, I think, or the early 50s. I don't know, it's in black and white anyway. And the second one came out in the last 10 years or so. So it's very, very fun, and it's essentially a little romp about islands and religion and Hebridean life, and that's why I enjoyed it so much. There's also a book called Monarch of the Glen by Compton Mackenzie, and this was also turned into a TV programme, Monarch of the Glen, that was on BBC about lairds and stuff like that, and modern day lairds. It was less interesting than this one. This one was more interesting in my opinion. It was definitely more fun. It also touches upon the religiousness of the islands and how that affects their day-to-day life in a way that quite a lot of outsiders, I would say, don't really understand to the same extent. And so that kind of parallel and having that Scottish history behind it is what makes this a real gem to have in comedy almost. Our next two books are going to stay in the past, but this time we're going to go even further back. And we're going to go back into the mid 19th century, same time as Madeline Miller. You can probably tell what kind of era I like reading about the most, and go into a nice little tartan noir drama. And that is The Way of All Flesh by Ambrose Parry. Now, this is a husband and wife writing team, and essentially this is a murder mystery about women dying in Edinburgh, and the kind of detective characters are three people who are all connected by working for the same guy, or the guy's one of the characters. So you've got Will, who is apprenticing for a anaesthetist. What do you call it? A gynecologist, but it's like for giving pregnant women at the time, and who is a pioneer of anesthesiology. There we go, got it. And then he's also one of the main characters in it. And the third character is his housemaid, Sarah Fisher, who is basically this parallel to Will, and she has the intelligence, the fact that she's actually smarter than him and kind of doing the same job, but is getting like no credit and none of the privilege that comes with that. So it starts with them kind of independently realizing there's something going wrong, and then they come together and work throughout it. This really does such a good job of portraying the poverty and the inequality in Edinburgh at the time, in 1847 to be exact, and also showing a kind of lesser sunshine side of history, and that's women's health history. So, the advent of anesthesiology, which came about because they were like, okay, women are in so much pain. Is there a way we can stop this? That sort of thing, and it's a great history lesson as well, packed into this really, really good book. And there's one scene that I absolutely love when they end up going to the Calton Hill Observatory, which, as an astronomer, I really, really love because it's one of the oldest astronomy towers in the UK, and it's just so perfectly described how it was in 1847. So they really did their due diligence in doing historical kind of facts and history about it, which is why I think this one has a real good place in my heart. This is a series, so the second and the third one's out in paperback. I haven't read them yet. I bought the second one and I've seen the third one, and I've been waiting to watch it. The next one is The Art of Dying, and I think the third one is called The Corruption of Blood. And I will definitely get on that soon, so you might see me with my wrap up at some point. Right, we're barely jumping anywhere at this point. I think we're jumping 20 years into the future from that last one, which was going to be 1869. And then we're also going slightly further north for His Bloody Project by Graham McRae Burnett. Now, this book sent me into such a spin of emotions when I first read it, because I'd never ever encountered a book which portrayed how I grew up more. And then you might go, this was set 150 years ago. How could it possibly portray it? And but it does. It portrays that line between Highlands and Lowlands, and the kind of isolation of kind of not really fitting in, and having that kind of culture speak to you in a way through language and kind of outside influence, which really was kind of revolutionary for me, because at that point all I'd really heard about or read about in terms of Scottish literature was really, really Highland stuff, which is all well and good, but it's not really. I'm kind of hybrid at this point between the Highlands and the Lowlands, so I struggle with it. And then, or the Lowland stuff, which is a lot of it is um, noir, tartan noir, drugs, crime, as it probably is because that's what Glasgow and Edinburgh and the Central Belt were known for at that time. So that kind of like two worlds almost. This is the first time that I ever saw that both kind of combined, and I actually googled it, and I believe that Graham McRae Burnett had a very similar both of worlds kind of upbringing, which would make sense why so much of the language that's used in this makes sense to me in a way that hasn't from any other book or film or TV program that I've ever really come across before. I think this is why I give this such a high rating, because the story's good. Don't get me wrong, it's not the best story that I've ever read, but it was the way it was written, which was really, really fascinating to me and spoke to me in a way that no other book had till that point. So next up, we have more fantasy or abstract books. And the first one that I'm going to be talking about is The Glomen by Kirsty Logan. Now, Kirsty Logan is a brilliant author who writes a lot of women loving women romances, fantasy books, and if you want I would recommend pretty much all of her books that I've read so far. Can't remember off the top of my head, but they've all been really, really good and I've enjoyed them. So I would recommend her as an author if that's the kind of thing that you're looking for. But this one in particular really kind of hit home for me as well. So essentially, not really it's not really said that it's a Scottish island as such, but the it's so recognisable to anyone who is Scottish, that it is set in Scotland, and that takes so much inspiration from that. Same with the fact that she is also Scottish, Kirsty Logan, and does all this with it. So we have essentially this young girl who lives in this island, and the island's full of magic, and it's slowly pulling people in who don't want to be there and making them trapped on the island and kind of turning themselves to stone. When her brother dies, the whole family's thrown into chaos, and that's when a mysterious and irresistible young woman named Peril arrives, and it kind of spirals into this beautiful web of Selkie mythology and also mermaid mythology and how it's different over different cultures and kind of following certain things. It's a very, very interestingly come across book that it's hard to really encapsulate what it is. It's very, very abstract. Um, but there is a plot running through it, but it's more up in the head what it kind of does things to you. And it's a very, very interesting read. So if you've got, I don't know, a couple of days to read this one, I would recommend it because it's just such a beautifully atmospheric book and it just works really well. Oh, the other one that Kirsty Logan wrote that I really liked was about a circus on boats, if I remember rightly. Gosh, I can't even remember what it is. Go and have a look at it. It's really good too. And yeah. So, Library of the Dead by T.L. Hoocher. And this is a fascinating book. So he is half Scottish, half Zimbabwean, and his character, Ropa, is also the same. She is half Zimbabwean and half Scottish, and she uses that magic to kind of talk to the dead of Edinburgh. Now, when I picked this up, I assumed that it was going to be set in our kind of universe, but it's not. It's kind of set in an alternate universe where things are a little bit more shitty, right? And there's more magic, and there's this library, and it kind of discusses um, discrimination in Scotland and how that affects people who have settled here. So this is like third generation immigrants, that sort of thing. And it weaves in this magical tale beautifully, and it has such a beautiful sidekick of characters. And I'm really looking forward to getting the next one in this series, which is called Our Lady of Mysterious Ailments, which I think is it already out. I believe I saw it when I last time I was in Waterstones. But this one is really, really interesting because it's magical, but it's slightly wrong. So everything that she describes about Edinburgh, you recognise, but it's not right. It's off. And I also find that kind of fascinating because it was done on purpose. Now, if it wasn't done on purpose, then it would be annoying. But this is done on purpose and it's done well. Now, that's why I would recommend it. When I mean about this done well, an example of a book that doesn't do it well is The Violinist. Wait till I find it. The Strings of Murder by Oscar Manuel. It's set in Scotland and it just doesn't work. It just feels so out of place, low key, hateful towards Scottish people, and it's kind of horribly written in that way. The setting is not done well, which is why I didn't like this one. And I will not be picking up the second one. But yeah, that is my 7 kind of recommendations for books written by Scottish authors set in Scotland. Now, I'm going to come up with a couple of more kind of random ones that I've not read, and that includes Trainspotting by Irvine Welsh. Pretty much all of Irvine Welsh's books are quite popular and well known, so you know what? Knock yourself out with those ones. Then we have Ian M. Banks's crime stories. Crime stories. He also writes quite a lot of sci-fi books. I think can't remember what that series is called, but it's quite famous, I believe, and he's well known for it. And a book series that is also not by a Scottish person, but is quite good, and I quite like it. Tentatively like it. I've only read the first couple, and that is Shetland by Anne Cleves. And she's also the person that wrote Vera, and you might have seen the TV show Shetland that's been on BBC. Vera did that too. A couple of what classics that are written by Scottish authors. We've got Robert Louis Stevenson's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. He was part of the family of the Lighthouse Stevensons, which were a family that built lighthouses. He decided to become a writer instead. So we have that. We have Kidnapped and Treasure Island, all by him. Then we have Arthur Conan Doyle. He was Scottish. He wrote loads of books. Sherlock Holmes is his most famous, but he also wrote ones such as The Lost World, which is kind of like a early Jurassic Park type story. Very heavy in the colonialism, so be warned for that one. Hello, editing Zoe here. For some reason, my recording just cut out completely after this bit. I was only going to recommend one more book, and that is The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie. But other than that, I will bid you farewell since I can't remember anything else that I discussed at the end of that video. Next fortnight, I will have my next Doctor Who video up, and that'll be season 4. And then I'll have another book video, and then the fortnight after that will hopefully be my first Doctor rankings. So thank you very much for all the things, and I will see you next week. Bye bye.